Imagine walking into your office tomorrow, right? You sit down at your desk and you realize that your company's internal mentorship program,
Right, like the one for women in tech.
exactly, the one designed to help women move into management, or maybe it's a recruitment drive at historically black colleges. Imagine finding out that program has just been classified as a form of federal fraud.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And imagine that the federal government is now offering your coworkers a multi-million-dollar bounty to report your own human resources department for running it.
I mean, it sounds like a dystopian corporate thriller, to be honest.
Totally.
But it is the literal legal mechanism embedded in one of the documents sitting on the table between us today. We are looking at a fundamental rewiring of how the American workforce operates, and it's enforced by deputizing ordinary citizens.
Welcome to today's analysis. We've got a formidable stack of official documents in front of us today. We are looking at executive orders, presidential memoranda, official press releases, fact sheets.
It's a lot of paper.
It's a huge stack, and they all originate from the White House, and they're all dated within this very tight, intense window around late March 2026.
Yeah, it was a busy week.
Right. So our mission for this exploration is highly specific. We want to look past the official letterheads, the presidential seals, the carefully calibrated public relations framing. We want to figure out what these actions actually mean for you, the regular American.
Which is the most important part.
Exactly. We are going to examine the stark gap between what an executive order intends to do, or at least what the title claims it's doing, and its actual on-the-ground effects once it hits the real world.
Yeah, because that gap between intent and effect is where the real story lives. I mean, when you strip away the populist rhetoric, we have to ask, who is genuinely benefiting here?
Right.
Is it everyday citizens reaping the rewards of a streamlined government? Or are these policies quietly generating, massive windfalls for the wealthy, the well-connected, and centralized corporate interests?
So we are going to be on high alert for political theater. We're going to flag legally questionable maneuvers that push the structural boundaries of the United States Constitution.
And there are a few of those.
Oh, definitely. And we're going to meticulously parse this highly crafted, sometimes deeply deceptive wording. You want to evaluate how these specific directives impact things like public health care, the future of our children's education, and just basic human dignity.
But before we open the first folder, I need to explicitly address you, the listener, regarding the nature of the text we're about to read today.
Yeah, this is really important.
Because these are official communications coming from a highly polarized political administration, they contain incredibly charged language. You will hear phrases specifically engineered to target political opponents, bypass nuanced policy debate, and evoke really visceral, emotional reactions.
From both sides of the aisle.
Exactly. So we need to establish absolute ground rules for this session. We are strictly nonpartisan here. We are absolutely not taking sides, nor are we endorsing the viewpoints, the cultural policies, or the aggressive rhetoric contained in these documents.
Right.
Our job today is entirely analytical. We are simply going to impartially report on the contents provided in the stack of paper, and we're going to decode the underlying mechanics of the policies. We want you to understand the structural shifts at play so you can clearly see the architecture of what is being built.
Well said. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the most urgent document in this stack deals with an immediate, real-time crisis. It's a presidential memorandum dated March 27, 2026.
The TSA one.
Right. The subject line reads, "Paying our great Transportation Security Administration officers and employees."
It sounds incredibly supportive, right? Almost folksy.
Yeah, totally folksy. But the legal maneuver happening underneath that title is extraordinary.
It really is. The premise of the document hinges on a severe breakdown in federal operations. The text lays out the facts. A Department of Homeland Security shutdown is currently in its 6th make.
And 6 weeks is a massive duration for a lapse in appropriations.
Yeah.
I mean, that means more than 60,000 Transportation Security Administration employees are essentially working for free.
Yeah.
This includes 50,000 transportation security officers who are actively standing at the checkpoints, running the X-ray machines, and performing vital security functions at domestic airports across the entire country.
And the human toll of that is immediate. It's devastating. The memorandum itself maps out the collateral damage here. Nearly 500 transportation security officers have already resigned.
Wow.
And thousands more are calling in sick at record rates.
And you have to look at the mechanics of why that is happening. If you're a federal worker pulling down a modest salary, missing one paycheck is a crisis.
Oh, absolutely.
Missing 3 paychecks over 6 weeks, I mean, that means you literally cannot afford the gasoline to commute to the
You
airport.
can't pay for childcare.
Right. Your credit score is tanking because you are defaulting on your mortgage or your car loan. They aren't calling in sick as a coordinated strike.
No.
They're calling in sick because the basic economic infrastructure of their lives has collapsed.
And the downstream effect on the general public is equally severe. The memo states that security wait times at some major airports have stretched to 3 or more hours.
Which is insane.
Interstate commerce is choking, the travel industry is taking a massive hit, and, national security is arguably compromised when the people screening luggage are exhausted, distracted by financial ruin, and operating understaffed checkpoints.
But the truly fascinating part of this document isn't just the description of the crisis. It's the linguistic framing of the cause.
Yes.
In the very first paragraph, the president's memo explicitly defines this as a Democrat-caused shutdown.
Right there in the text.
Right there. It accuses congressional Democrats of a reckless decision to prioritize criminal illegal aliens over American citizens. The text claims the shutdown is persisting solely because political rivals are demanding to prohibit the enforcement of federal immigration law.
This is where we have to pause and analyze the architecture of the wording. This is a textbook example of deceptive, charged rhetoric embedded into the foundation of an official legal directive.
Yeah.
Historically, a presidential memorandum is an administrative tool, right? It's a set of instructions from the chief executive to the various departments of the executive branch on how to manage their operations.
It's usually pretty dry stuff.
Exactly. But by legally defining the event as a Democrat-caused shutdown within the binding text of the order, the administration is effectively bypassing the entire concept of a policy debate.
Huh.
They're treating a highly subjective political narrative as an established, indisputable legal fact.
I see. So it forces anyone reading the memo, or like any federal official executing the memo, to operate under the mandated premise that the opposing party is actively prioritizing criminals over citizens.
Right.
It's a framing device engineered to justify the extraordinary norm-breaking action that follows in the very next paragraph.
Let's look at that action because the constitutional implications are just staggering.
Yeah.
The president writes that since Congress refuses to act, the administration will take matters into its own hands.
Okay.
He declares the situation an emergency that compromises the security of the nation. Then he issues a direct order to the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Office of Management and Budget.
What's the order?
He directs them to, quoting the text here, use funds that have a reasonable and logical nexus to TSA operations to provide TSA employees with the compensation and benefits that would have accrued to them.
Okay, that phrase, reasonable and logical nexus, is carrying an unbelievable amount of legal weight.
So much weight.
Let's break down the mechanics of what is actually being commanded here. Because the way I'm reading this, it's akin to a household budget dispute.
Okay, lay it out.
Wait, is that legal? That sounds like you and your roommate are in a fight over the budget, so you just take their grocery money to pay the electric bill because there's a logical nexus to keeping the house running.
That is, yeah, the roommate analogy perfectly illustrates the mechanical bypass happening here. When you ask if this is legal, we have to throw a massive constitutional flag on the play.
Yeah.
This action is highly likely to be unconstitutional, and it strikes at the very heart of how the United States government is structured to operate.
We are talking about the power of the purse.
Yes. Article 1 of the Constitution vests the power of the purse exclusively in the legislative branch. Congress collects the taxes, and Congress appropriates the funds.
Not the president.
Exactly. The executive branch cannot simply spend money that has not been explicitly authorized and appropriated by Congress for a highly specific purpose. This is the foundational check on executive power. If the president wants to build a bridge, fund a war, or pay a TSA agent, he has to ask Congress for the money.
But the memo attempts to give itself legal cover, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it explicitly states it is doing this consistent with applicable law, including 31 U.S.C. 1301A.
Which is incredibly ironic because 31 U.S.C. 1301 is the purpose statute. The purpose statute generally mandates that federal funds may only be applied to the specific objects for which the appropriations were made.
Oh, wow.
There is also the Anti-Deficiency Act, which makes it a federal crime for a government employee to spend money the government doesn't actually have.
So what are they doing?
What the executive branch is attempting to do here is use a lapse in appropriations to declare a national emergency and then unilaterally sweep the accounts of the Department of Homeland Security. They are taking money earmarked for, say, Coast Guard cutter maintenance or border wall construction, and funneling it into TSA payroll, claiming that because all these things involve security, there is a logical nexus.
So they're effectively nullifying Congress entirely.
They are rendering the legislative branch functionally irrelevant in a budget dispute. If the executive branch can simply move money around without congressional approval whenever the president declares a political impasse to be a national emergency, then Congress loses its primary historical leverage.
Right.
The power of the purse is effectively transferred to the Oval Office.
Which brings us back to our core mission for this analysis, right? The gap between intent and effect. Who is actually being helped here? Does this executive action help the regular American?
In the immediate short-term reality, yes.
Well,
It absolutely helps regular Americans.
yeah, the agents get paid.
Exactly. It provides life-saving financial relief to the 60,000 TSA agents who desperately need their paychecks to avoid foreclosure and feed their children. And it helps the millions of everyday travelers who are stuck in endless lines, missing flights, and watching the domestic travel system collapse. The localized effect is undeniably positive and necessary for those workers.
But the long-term structural effect paints a very different picture.
A very different picture. The broader effect is a massive, unprecedented expansion of centralized executive power. The administration is utilizing a very real, very painful crisis involving working-class Americans to set a new constitutional precedent.
Right.
If this maneuver stands legal scrutiny, future administrations could intentionally manufacture or simply endure budget standoffs, knowing they don't actually need to negotiate with Congress. They can just repurpose funds by executive fiat.
It fundamentally alters the DNA of the government. They're saving the immediate crisis at the airport by quietly dismantling the constitutional load-bearing walls of the republic.
That's a great way to put it.
This aggressive use of executive power to bypass Congress over TSA pay reveals a broader philosophy of centralization. But they aren't just overriding the legislative branch.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see them applying that exact same centralized command and control approach to the internal operations of private corporations.
Yes, let's talk about that. We're looking at the March 26 executive order titled Addressing DEI Discrimination by Federal Contractors, along with its highly detailed accompanying White House fact sheet. This is a profound regulatory document that requires very close mechanical reading.
It really does.
Let's establish the core mandate of this order.
Yeah.
The directive here is that any company contracting with the federal government must completely dismantle and strip out all diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI programs.
And the scope of this is breathtaking. This isn't just aimed at the massive prime contractors like Lockheed Martin or Boeing.
Yeah.
The text explicitly states that this ban cascades down to contractors' subcontracts and subcontractors' lower-tier subcontracts.
The supply chain implications are massive.
Let's walk through a hypothetical scenario to understand the mechanics here. Suppose you own a mid-sized logistics firm in Ohio.
Okay.
You don't hold a direct contract with the Pentagon, but you provide shipping pallets to a regional distributor who supplies components to a software firm, which in turn builds logistics software for the Department of Defense.
So I'm way down the chain.
Way down. But under the wording of this order, your pallet company in Ohio is a lower-tier subcontractor. Therefore, your internal human resources policies are now subject to this federal ban.
Wow. And the rationale provided in the text of the order is intense and heavily ideological. Section 1, the policy and purpose, claims that DEI activities are inherently racially discriminatory, that they are often illegal, and that they involve treating people differently based on their race or ethnicity, rather than treated equally and objectively based on their merit and without regard to their immutable characteristics.
Let's scrutinize the administration's use of language there. It is a masterful rhetorical flip.
How so?
They are taking the phrase immutable characteristics, which was the absolute bedrock concept of the mid-20th century civil rights movement, the idea that you cannot be judged or denied housing based on the color of your skin, something you cannot change.
Right.
And they have weaponized it against the very programs designed to address historical inequalities.
They are completely redefining the vocabulary of equity. Corporate DEI programs, historically, were structured pathways designed to integrate marginalized groups, minorities, women, veterans into corporate boardrooms and management structures from which they had been systematically excluded for decades.
Exactly. But look at the White House fact sheet. It claims that DEI programs actually increase workforce turnover by elevating immutable characteristics over job performance. It asserts that DEI imposes artificial compliance costs and reduces the available labor pool by artificially limiting companies to hiring certain individuals based purely on race.
So, by labeling corporate diversity initiatives as active discrimination against the majority, the order uses the language of equality to dismantle the machinery of equity.
Yes.
It is legally mandating a form of colorblindness by outlawing any corporate program that acknowledges color, background, or structural disadvantage.
And it frames these programs not just as moral failings, but as financial drains on the taxpayer. The text argues that the costs of running a corporate mentorship program are inevitably passed on to the federal government through inflated contract pricing.
Ah, I see.
This is a highly crafted argument designed to appeal to the fiscal conservative while executing a massive cultural intervention.
But this order is not merely a philosophical memo. It's not just political theater designed for an evening news soundbite. This order contains incredibly sharp enforcement teeth.
It really does.
The text demands that contractors actively police each other. Section 3, Clause 4, states that the contractor will report any subcontractor's known or reasonably knowable conduct that may violate this clause.
Wow.
It threatens cancellation, termination, or suspension of federal contracts and outright debarment from ever doing business with the government again.
And debarment is the corporate death penalty. If a company that relies on government revenue is debarred, they simply cease to exist.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The true surveillance mechanism, the part that turns this from a standard bureaucratic directive into a nationwide legal minefield, is found in Section 3, Clause 6.
Yes, this is the key.
It states that compliance with this anti-DEI clause is material to the government's payment decisions for purposes of the False Claims Act. Let's do a deep dive into the mechanics of the False Claims Act. Why does invoking this specific law change the entire landscape of corporate America?
To understand the weight of this, you have to look at the history of the False Claims Act. It is often referred to as the Lincoln Law, passed during the Civil War in 1863.
Yep.
At the time, the Union Army was being severely defrauded by corrupt contractors who were selling them blind horses, rancid rations, and boxes of sawdust disguised as gunpowder.
Sawdust? Wow.
Yeah, it was bad. The government didn't have the investigative manpower to audit every contractor, so they created a brilliant legal mechanism called a qui tam provision. This provision allows a private citizen, a whistleblower, to file a lawsuit on behalf of the United States government against a company that is defrauding the taxpayers.
And the incentive for the citizen is massive, right?
Big huge.
If the government joins this suit and wins, or if the citizen wins it independently, the whistleblower gets a percentage of the financial penalty recovered.
A very large percentage. Under the modern False Claims Act, a successful whistleblower can receive between 15 and 30% of the total recovered damages.
30%.
Up to 30%. And because the damages in government contract fraud are typically automatically tripled by the court, we are routinely talking about multi-million-dollar payouts for the individual who brings the suit.
Now let's apply that Civil War-era anti-fraud mechanic to this specific executive order banning DEI. By tying DEI compliance to the False Claims Act, the administration is effectively deputizing every single employee of every federal contractor and subcontractor in the United States.
That's exactly what it does.
Let's go back to our hypothetical logistics firm in Ohio. Let's say your human resources department runs a specialized mentorship group aimed at promoting women in supply chain management.
Well, under the broad definitions outlined in Section 2 of this order, which define discriminatory activities as including training, mentoring, or leadership development programs that target specific demographics, your HR department is in direct violation.
Right.
And because your company is a lower-tier federal subcontractor, an executive at your firm signed a binding legal certification stating they are in compliance with all federal directives.
So by continuing to operate the Women's Mentorship Program while still cashing the checks that originate from the federal government, the company is technically committing fraud under the newly expanded definition of the False Claims Act.
That is the exact legal theory this executive order establishes. This means that any disgruntled employee, or simply any employee highly motivated by the prospect of a massive, life-changing whistleblower payout,
which who wouldn't be?
Exactly. They can secretly gather internal emails, training manuals, and HR memos and sue their own employer on behalf of the federal government.
That creates an environment of absolute paranoia injected directly into the bloodstream of corporate America. It establishes a financial bounty system on diversity initiatives.
And it forces massive, immediate compliance headaches onto businesses. The administration frequently brands itself as highly pro-business and focused on reducing red tape.
Yeah, that's their whole brand.
But the practical effect of this order is that corporate legal departments across the country will have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars auditing every single internal club, recruitment drive, and hiring practice just to ensure they aren't vulnerable to a devastating lawsuit from their own staff.
It completely contradicts the entire premise of free enterprise and letting businesses operate without federal interference.
Totally.
So let's evaluate who is genuinely helped and who is hurt by this directive. Does this actually help everyday workers get jobs based purely on merit, as the text claims? Or does it hurt causes like dignity and equal opportunity?
Well, if we look at the effect on marginalized groups, the damage is structural. For decades, corporate DEI programs, while certainly imperfect and occasionally poorly executed, served as the primary structured mechanism to ensure that minority groups, women, and veterans had visibility and opportunity in industries where they were historically locked out.
Right.
This order forcibly dismantles those pathways under the threat of federal prosecution. It actively harms efforts to ensure basic dignity and equitable advancement in the corporate world, replacing those programs with an enforced silence on demographic disparities.
And the real beneficiaries are the ideological goals of the administration. They are leveraging the immense purchasing power of the federal government, hundreds of billions of dollars in annual contracts, to force the private sector to adopt a highly specific cultural and political worldview.
Yeah.
It is a staggering display of centralized executive power dictating the internal culture of private enterprise.
It really is.
But this command and control approach to corporate HR makes the next set of documents even more jarring.
How so?
On one hand, the administration is heavily regulating and restricting the internal operations of businesses regarding diversity. But simultaneously, they are handing massive, unregulated influence over the future of the American economy directly to corporate elites.
Ah, yes. You are looking at the March 25 release announcing the appointments to the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, commonly known as PCAST.
The text of this announcement is brief, but the list of names is incredible. These are the individuals formally tasked with advising the president on science, technology, and innovation policy.
It's quite the list.
I'll read it. The roster includes Mark Andreessen, Sergey Brin, Safra Katz, Michael Dell, Larry Ellison, Jensen Huang, Lisa Su, Mark Zuckerberg.
I mean, it reads less like an advisory board and more like the seating chart for the most exclusive high net worth billionaire summit in Silicon Valley.
Totally. We are talking about the founders, CEOs, and primary shareholders of Meta, Google, Oracle, Dell, NVIDIA, and AMD. Historically, PCST has included a mix of academic scientists, independent researchers, and industry experts to provide balanced scientific counsel.
Right? Traditionally.
This iteration is purely a roster of the wealthiest tech titans on the planet. Let's analyze the stated intent versus the actual effect. The release claims that under the president's leadership, this council will ensure that all Americans thrive in the golden age of innovation.
That is the populist framing, right? The idea that unleashing these specific visionaries will create a rising tide that lifts all American boats. But we have to examine the mechanics of what happens when you appoint active sitting CEOs of the world's largest monopolies to a presidential advisory board.
It seems like the ultimate definition of regulatory capture, operating right out in the open. Let's break down regulatory capture. It occurs when a political entity, policymaker, or regulatory agency is co-opted to serve the commercial, ideological, or political interests of a minor constituency, such as a particular industry. It's like letting the owners of the largest casinos write the rulebook and enforcement protocols for the state gaming commission.
And the mechanical advantage this provides to these specific billionaires is incalculable. These individuals now have a direct, institutionalized line to the Oval Office.
Yeah.
They will be writing the white papers, drafting the policy recommendations, and shaping the federal regulations that will inevitably govern their own companies.
Can you give an example?
Consider Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA. NVIDIA currently holds a near monopoly on the highly specialized microchips required to train advanced artificial intelligence models.
Right, the GPUs.
Exactly. If he is officially advising the president on the future of AI, hardware regulations, export controls, and federal computing infrastructure investments, whose interests are primarily being served, the American taxpayer or NVIDIA's shareholders.
It creates a closed loop where the regulators and the regulated are literally the same people.
Precisely.
And the implications of this billionaire brain trust become profoundly clear when you look at the event that took place at the White House just one day prior to this PCAST announcement.
The timing is critical. On March 24th and 25th, First Lady Melania Trump hosted a massive global summit at the White House and the State Department, part of an initiative titled Fostering the Future Together.
Representatives from 45 nations attended this summit, specifically to discuss integrating artificial intelligence into education systems worldwide. And the details provided in the official press release are surreal. They describe a fundamental reimagining of how children will be raised and educated.
What does she introduce?
In her official remarks, the First Lady introduces an American-made humanoid robot named Figure 3 to the assembled international diplomats.
A humanoid robot.
Yeah. The text notes, this is the first time such advanced robotic technology has been formally presented in a diplomatic setting at the White House. During the speech, she literally turns and addresses the machine, saying, Figure 3, thank you for joining me at day 2.
We have to look at the 3 pillars she defines for this technology in the classroom. First, using AI to perfectly personalize learning for every student. Second, the widespread emergence of humanoid educators placed directly inside family homes.
Inside the home.
Right. And third, utilizing this fusion of tech and education as the primary driver for America's future economic dominance.
She specifically introduces the concept of an AI educator named Plato. I want to read an extended quote from her speech to capture the exact vision being sold here. She says, imagine a humanoid educator named Plato. Access to the classical studies is now instantaneous. Plato will provide a personalized experience, adaptive to the needs of each student. Plato is always patient and always available. The byproduct, a more well-rounded lifestyle for our children, freeing up time for being with friends, playing sports.
The public relations narrative is heavily focused on a frictionless utopia.
Very utopia.
It presents a world where every child receives a perfectly tailored, endlessly patient AI tutor, eliminating the struggles of traditional schooling and giving kids their childhoods back. It is packaged as a profound benefit to everyday families.
But we have to look at the underlying mechanics of this utopian vision. And more importantly, who owns the infrastructure? In her remarks, the First Lady explicitly lists the companies partnering in this summit. She praises them as best-in-class companies.
What's fascinating here is the companies she actually names.
Right. She names Meta, Microsoft, OpenAI, X, Palantir, Google, Zoom, and Adobe.
The overlap is staggering. The companies being heralded as the architects of this new public education paradigm are the exact same companies owned, founded, or heavily invested in by the billionaires who were appointed to the PCSTST advisory board the very next day.
Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, Sergey Brin's Google.
This forces us to assess the true impact on the American education system. The intent claims that AI will personalize learning and boost critical thinking. But what is the actual effect of privatizing public education through the deployment of closed-source, proprietary AI systems and humanoid robots?
Are we genuinely helping children, or are we creating a massive captive market of tens of millions of students for these specific tech giants?
Right.
Think about the mechanics of replacing a human public school teacher. A human teacher is a public employee, typically unionized, and directly accountable to a local elected school board and the parents of the community.
Yeah.
If you replace that accountability with a proprietary algorithm owned by Meta or Google who dictates the curriculum, how do you audit a black box neural network to see what worldview it is subtly promoting to a third grader?
And perhaps the most critical question, who controls the data? An AI tutor that perfectly adapts to a student is doing so by extracting an unfathomable amount of behavioral, psychological, and biometric data from that child every single day.
Which is incredibly valuable.
The administration is remarkably transparent about why this data extraction is valuable. You don't even have to read between the lines. They say the quiet part out loud in the text of the speech.
Towards the end of her remarks, the First Lady outlines the ultimate macroeconomic goal. She states, America, we are obligated to ensure that our children become the most technologically fluent and highly educated generation in the world. In doing so, the United States will secure long-term economic superiority. This will drive GDP expansion, attract global investment, and put our nation in control of arguably the most important asset in the future, Intellectual property.
Intellectual property. That phrase reveals the entire architecture of the policy. The actual effect heavily skews toward benefiting tech corporations under the guise of revolutionizing education.
So it's not just about the kids playing sports.
The primary goal isn't just to produce a happy, well-rounded child who has more time to play. The goal is treating the cognitive development of the next generation as a raw resource, an algorithmic strip mining operation designed to generate intellectual property that will be owned, monetized, and tightly controlled by the very tech titans advising the administration.
Wow.
It is a staggering transfer of influence over human development into corporate hands.
It paints a picture of a future where human interaction is systematically replaced by AI for the sake of efficiency and immense corporate profit.
It really does.
But there's a stark, jarring contrast in this stack of documents. While the administration is aggressively pushing toward a frictionless, digital, AI-driven future for the wealthy elite and the tech monopolies, their approach to the physical, on-the-ground reality in American cities is intensely different.
A complete 180.
When dealing with urban centers, the policies abandon the frictionless digital utopia and become heavily militarized, physical, and blunt.
We are turning our analysis to the March 23rd release regarding the president's trip to Memphis, Tennessee.
Yes. The document is titled, President Trump's Memphis Safe Task Force Delivers Crushing Blow to Crime. And the language here is aggressive. It describes a decisive, aggressive federal intervention involving the National Guard and various federal law enforcement agencies deployed directly into a major American city.
The statistics provided to back up the success of this intervention are massive.
Very massive.
The text states there have been more than 7,400 arrests. They have seized 1,219 illegal firearms. They have located 150 missing children. And the overall crime statistics are touted as a monumental success. Overall crime down 43%, motor vehicle thefts down 67%, homicides down 35%.
This is a deeply complex document to parse because we have to simultaneously hold two very different, very true realities in our heads.
Okay, let's break that down.
First, we must acknowledge the real localized benefit. For regular Americans living in those Memphis neighborhoods, drastically lower violent crime rates genuinely improve their safety, their peace of mind, and their dignity.
Oh, absolutely.
Getting over 1,200 illegal firearms off the streets is a tangible public good. Locating 150 missing children is an absolute triumph. If homicides are down 35%, that represents actual human lives saved. Fathers, mothers, and children who are alive today because the violence was suppressed. You cannot ignore or minimize the profoundly positive effect of that.
You absolutely cannot. But the second reality we must weigh is the scale, the method, and the human cost of the intervention itself.
Right.
The text boasts of 7,400 arrests in a single city over a compressed timeline. Think about the logistical and constitutional reality of that number. 7,400 people is the population of a small town.
That's a huge amount of people to process.
To process that many human bodies through a local justice system requires a staggering level of force. It implies the utilization of military personnel, the National Guard, operating in a domestic law enforcement capacity, which always raises severe questions regarding the Posse Comitatus Act, depending on whether the Guard is under state or federal control.
It is the ultimate manifestation of zero-tolerance policing. While the press release glosses over the mechanics, achieving 7,400 arrests requires severe daily disruptions to the fabric of that community.
Yeah.
It means constant traffic stops, widespread searches, and mass detentions. It overloads local jails and the public defender system. The human costs and the generational trauma of that level of aggressive federal intervention are immense, even when it produces the desired statistical drop in violent crime.
And the wording in the press release leverages this complex reality for pure political theater.
How so?
The text explicitly blames the policies of Democrats for past crime and bloodshed, using the very real tragedy of urban violence to score direct partisan points. Meanwhile, it takes exclusive federal credit for the drops in local law enforcement statistics. It aggressively pushes a narrative where local municipal governance is an inherent failure and only an overwhelming militarized federal power can restore order.
It treats an American city less like a municipality of citizens and more like a conquered territory to prove an ideological point.
Exactly. And speaking of how statistics are manipulated to serve a specific ideological narrative, we need to examine the March 26 release on immigration. This document contains perhaps the most deceptive framing of data in the entire stack.
Let's get into it. This release is titled, America First in Action. U.S. Records Net Negative Migration Across Every Metro Area.
The administration is claiming a historic turnaround in immigration policy.
They include a map, and the numerical data is genuinely shocking. It shows net immigration falling in every single metropolitan area in the United States in 2025.
Every single one.
Let me read some of the specific numbers they highlight. Seattle down 31%, Denver down 72%, Chicago down 62%, New York City down 65%, Dallas down 52%, El Paso down a staggering 95%, Los Angeles down 67%.
The numbers are huge.
The White House quotes data from the New York Times and the Census Bureau to establish the factual basis of these drops. But then, the press release pivots. It frames this massive demographic shift exclusively as a triumphant victory over, quote, illegal border crossings and decades of open border failures. They present it as definitive proof of the president's commitment to securing our borders and protecting American workers.
Here is where we must unpack the deception, because it relies on conflating two entirely different economic metrics.
Okay, explain that.
The administration is taking a statistic about overall net migration. Net migration is a macro demographic number. It includes everyone moving into or out of an area. It includes legal immigrants, H-1B tech visa holders, international university students, legal agricultural workers, paroled asylum seekers, and yes, undocumented individuals.
Everyone.
Everyone. But the White House is rhetorically conflating that entire massive demographic category exclusively with illegal border crossings.
Wait, if net immigration falls across every city, isn't that also choking off the legal labor supply?
You have identified the exact macroeconomic contradiction embedded in this policy.
Yeah, let me challenge the entire premise of this being a victory, because from an economic standpoint, this looks like a massive self-inflicted wound. If net immigration falls by 65% in the New York metro area, or 72% in Denver, we aren't just talking about stopping undocumented individuals at the southern border. We are talking about choking off the vital legal labor supply that physically runs those cities.
The text claims the severe reduction is a pro-worker victory that stops the undermining of American jobs. But if you look at the mechanics of urban economics, severe population loss, and the sudden choking off of migration to major economic hubs almost invariably triggers an economic doom loop.
Because an economy requires people to function. If Denver loses 72% of its incoming migration, there are suddenly vastly fewer people to rent apartments.
Landlords lose income.
Right. There are fewer people buying groceries, purchasing cars, and paying local sales taxes. And crucially, there are fewer people to fill essential, often grueling jobs in hospitality, commercial construction, elder care, and agriculture.
Precisely. When the local tax base shrinks due to population loss, municipal revenues collapse. That means less money for public schools, less money for road maintenance, and less money for local fire departments.
So it hurts everyone.
What is being aggressively sold in this press release as a populist victory for the regular American citizen is, in reality, starving the very economic engines those regular people rely on for their livelihoods. A massive demographic contraction traditionally signals severe economic stagnation, not triumph.
It is a masterful use of entirely accurate statistics to tell a fundamentally deceptive story about the health of the American economy. They are burning the furniture to keep the house warm and claiming they solved the heating crisis.
That's a perfect analogy.
As we look at the final few documents in our stack, we see a distinct shift in tone. Not everything the administration is publishing is aggressive, legally combative, or focused on dismantling structures. Some of it is carefully designed to highlight the softer, more universally unifying side of the presidency.
Every administration, regardless of party, requires a steady stream of documents that project simple, unquestionable competence and national unity.
We have a briefing from March 26th detailing the signing of 3 congressional bills, H.R. 3377, H.R. 7194, and H.R. 7211. These bills authorize the president to award the Medal of Honor to 3 men, James Capers Jr. and John W. Ripley for extraordinary valor in Vietnam, and Nicholas Dockery for valor in Afghanistan.
These are solemn, deeply respectful actions that honor immense military heroism and sacrifice. There is no partisan angle to be found here. It is the president acting in his capacity as the unifying head of state.
We also see a quiet executive order extending the Federal Emergency Management Agency Review Council. This is standard, mundane, bureaucratic housekeeping necessary to keep an advisory board legally operating.
Right.
And then there is a release titled Promise Made, Promise Kept. President Trump brings another American home.
Let's talk about that one.
This document details the return of Dennis Coyle, an American researcher from Colorado who was released after enduring more than a year in Taliban captivity in Afghanistan. The release also lists several others freed by the administration's diplomatic efforts over time. Ksenia Karolina, a ballet dancer held in Russia, Mark Fogel, a teacher in a Russian prison, Keith Siegel, held by Hamas, George Glesman, held by the Taliban.
When we evaluate the effect of these actions, the conclusion is straightforward. These diplomatic interventions have real, undeniable, and profoundly positive impacts.
Yes, absolutely.
Securing the release of hostages and returning them to their families is an objective moral good. It genuinely helps regular Americans in the most profound way possible.
But even in moments of undeniable triumph, there's a distinct layer of narrative control in public relations.
Oh.
The phrase, promise made, promise kept, is a trademarked political campaign slogan. Embedding a campaign slogan into an official diplomatic update blends the duties of the state with the marketing of the politician. The text heavily emphasizes that, under President Trump, the United States does not leave its citizens behind, working to construct a narrative of unparalleled, almost unilateral personal effectiveness for the executive.
Which brings us directly to the final and perhaps most structurally revealing document in our stack. On March 27, the White House announced the launch of a new official mobile application.
The press release is incredibly enthusiastic. It says the new app delivers the president and his administration directly to the American people like never before.
Directly to your phone.
It promises to provide unfiltered, real-time updates straight from the source. It offers breaking news alerts sent directly to your lock screen, live streams of speeches, a comprehensive media library, and a portal to send feedback directly to the administration. The tagline is, "From the Oval Office straight to your phone."
This raises an important question about how information is consumed and who verifies its accuracy.
It really does.
Throughout this analysis, we have dissected how the administration relies on highly crafted, sometimes deeply deceptive wording to achieve its goals. We saw it in the TSA memo, legally cementing a Democrat-caused shutdown.
Right.
We saw it in the DEI order, flipping the vocabulary, civil rights. We saw it in the immigration data, conflating legal demographic shifts with border security failures.
Normally, those official executive documents, press releases, and legal memos are filtered through an ecosystem of journalists, policy analysts, and legal experts before they reach the general public. The press reads the memo, spots the False Claims Act trap, and writes an article explaining the context.
But the explicit stated purpose of this mobile app is disintermediation. It is designed to remove the middleman entirely. It allows the executive branch to bypass journalistic scrutiny and analytical pushback.
So they just beam it straight to you.
It empowers the administration to beam its highly crafted, emotionally charged, and statistically manipulated narratives directly into the pockets of millions of American citizens. And crucially, it packages those unverified narratives under the authoritative guise of breaking news alerts and official government utility.
It is the architecture for an entire media ecosystem controlled exclusively by the executive branch, disguised as a helpful public service app. It turns the push notification into an instrument of state power.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've looked past the official letterheads, and we've decoded the mechanics hiding beneath the populist spin.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We really have. We've seen that while some specific actions, like utilizing diplomatic leverage to return hostages, or forcing through paychecks for desperate TSA agents, or seizing illegal firearms in Memphis, have real, undeniably positive effects in the short term, the broader structural picture is deeply concerning.
Yeah, the mechanics tell a different story.
Many of these executive orders deliberately weaponize the language of populism. They claim to help everyday workers or protect citizens, but the actual mechanical effect is to consolidate massive centralized power within the executive branch.
We see the administration bypassing the constitutional authority of Congress over the federal budget. We see them waging aggressive ideological battles inside private corporations, threatening businesses with ruinous False Claims Act lawsuits simply to eradicate internal diversity programs.
We see them militarizing local law enforcement interventions while claiming federal credit for localized drops in crime.
And simultaneously, we see them handing the keys to the future of our children's public education and the nation's scientific policy over to an unregulated brain trust of the world's wealthiest tech billionaires, openly prioritizing corporate intellectual property extraction over public accountability.
As we wrap up this exploration, the ultimate judgment regarding the health of these policies rests with you. We have decoded the legal mechanics, the economic realities, and the rhetorical strategies.
But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you process all of this. What stands out to you when you look at this stack of documents?
Yeah, what's the big takeaway?
We have just examined an administration that is willing to bypass the foundational constitutional power of the purse with a simple administrative memo. We have seen an administration willing to redefine foundational civil rights terminology via executive fiat to threaten corporate America.
Right.
We have seen them launch a digital platform designed to beam an unfiltered proprietary state narrative directly to your smartphone. And we have seen them place the primary architects of AI surveillance capitalism directly in charge of the nation's scientific future.
It's a lot to take in.
When you look at all of these sweeping structural actions happening simultaneously within a single week in March 2026, you have to ask yourself a fundamental question. Are we simply witnessing the standard aggressive operation of a modern American presidency? Or are we watching the rapid real-time construction of the architecture for a completely new kind of centralized corporate state power?
It brings us right back to the beginning. The diagnostic tools we usually rely on to understand our government are struggling to read the image. The official chart might say efficiency, merit, or public safety. But when you look closely at the mechanical bones of these policies, you find a structure that is entirely different than the one you were sold. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Keep reading between the lines.